today I'm going to offer you what might be called a neoclassical natural law theory. It's not going to be soup to nuts. That would take several books, but it will be lengthy because I do want to do justice to the extent that justice can be done in an hour and a half. So sit back, relax, listen, see if you can catch me sneaking the rabbit into the hat. I hope I won't be doing that, but if I do, I know that you will catch me. Jay has heard this one before. I presented it at a conference Jay and I attended together at Westmont College, so this will be old hat to him, or a second chance for him to catch me if he didn't get it the first time. Maybe some of the others have heard it as well. And again, this is not an overview of natural law theory or even of a particular natural law theory. This is more of an attempt to do natural law thinking. Let me begin by just staking out a controversial position among controversial positions on a very important foundational issue. So I'm going to begin by asserting that one's knowledge of natural law, and Jay's right, the classical tradition is right, that we all have knowledge of natural law, every single one of us. Our knowledge of natural law, like all knowledge, make my claim even bolder, begins with experience, but it does not end or even tarry there. So again, my first assertion is that our knowledge of natural law is not innate. None of our knowledge is innate. Some people think that to believe in natural law is to believe that people have innate moral knowledge. I don't believe people have innate moral knowledge. Our knowledge begins with experience, but it doesn't end or even tarry there. So I'm staking out a position on the theory of knowledge, not simply denying the theory that says knowledge is innate, or moral knowledge is innate, but also the third clause of my sentence says knowledge is not just experience. Knowledge is not simply the mind recording what is taken in by the senses and registering it somewhere. Knowing is an activity. In other words, it's something you do. It's not just something that happens to you. There are things that just happen to us. There are other things that we do. Knowing is something we do, whether the knowing is moral knowing or knowing in any of the other orders of intelligibility. And I'll be talking about the different orders of intelligibility, picking up some lines here from Aquinas, who picks up the basics of these lines from Aristotle. Knowing is an intellectual activity, to be sure. In that way, it's kind of different from kayaking or something like that. It's an intellectual activity, but an activity nonetheless. Now, as I say, and as Jay pointed out, we all have the experience of knowing. That's common. But again, to know is not merely to experience. Knowing is a complex and dynamic activity. Those of you who've done some work or studied some epistemology will know here that I'm distancing myself from the position that is sometimes called naive realism. So now the question in your mind should be, okay, where's he going to go? Is he going to adopt a kind of idealism, a la Kant, or has he got some other place he's heading? The answer is some other place he's heading. And I'm going to endorse a view that's sometimes called critical realism, that has been developed in our own time, I think, most fully and analytically sharply by the Canadian Jesuit philosopher Bernard Lonergan. Knowing is a complex and dynamic activity. The experience in the activity, the role of experience in the activity of knowing is to supply data on which the inquiring intellect works in the cause of achieving understanding. And that's true of all knowing, not simply moral knowing. although it is certainly true of moral knowing. Insights, in other words, are insights into data. They're not data-free insights. Philosophers these days like to talk about intuitions. They want to give themselves starting points. So they'll say, I have an intuition that, fill in the blank, you know, heteronormativity is bad. And then we'll go from there. Okay? I don't quite know what they mean by intuitions. But if they mean what in modern times people have tended to mean, they mean insights that float free of data. I don't think there are any. So insights are insights into data. They are, as the philosophical theologian Bernard Lonergan, whom I mentioned, brilliantly demonstrated by inviting readers to observe and reflect on their own ordinary intellectual operations. These insights that we have are the fruit of a dynamic and integrated process of experiencing, understanding, and judging. Those of you who are familiar with Lonergan will know what all that entails. Those of you who aren't might have a look, although it'll take you a long time to look because it's a long book, at his 1955 book, Insight, a study of human understanding, which I think is one of the great philosophical achievements of the 20th century. I didn't care much for the theological work that Lonergan produced after Insight in the 1960s, but I continue to think that his philosophical work, especially on epistemology and cognitional theory and the development of what I referred to earlier as a critical realism, that is at once not a naive realism but does not stop with a Kantian kind of idealism that sees knowing as dynamic, but really precludes the possibility of in the end, judging. So what are the data supplied by experience that are at the foundation of practical judgments? That is to say, insights that constitute knowledge of natural law. Jay yesterday introduced us to the distinction, we get beginning with Aristotle, between practical and theoretical knowledge. Knowledge of natural law is, I want to argue, fundamentally practical knowledge. It can't be entirely independent of theoretical knowledge, but it's fundamentally practical knowledge. And so the insights that constitute our knowledge of natural law are these insights that are at the foundations of our practical judgment, and they're insights into the data supplied by experience. They're objects of intelligibly choiceworthy possibilities. Possibilities that, inasmuch as they provide reasons for acting of a certain sort, that is, more than merely instrumental reasons, we grasp not as bare possibilities, but as opportunities. Now, in that sentence, I introduced you to two distinctions. One is the distinction between instrumental and more than merely instrumental reasoning. The second is the distinction between bare possibilities and opportunities. Let me explain. Someone has an instrumental reason to do something when the doing the something is a means to something else that is the end to which the activity is a means. So I work to earn money. Do I want money for its own sake? You don't need to be an economist like Brother Mueller to know the answer to that question. No, nobody wants money for its own sake. I mean, oddballs like Ebenezer Scrooge who do want money for its own sake, or seem to want money for its own sake, really are suffering from some kind of a delusion. I mean, they're fetishizing little green paper or something like that. Money just in itself is useless. It's only useful when it's a means to something else. So someone buys money in order, someone earns money, someone works in order to earn money, in order to buy medicine, in order to treat a horrible disease that has afflicted his young child. Well, yeah, we understand he's got a reason for earning money. It's not irrational, but the reason is an instrumental reason. Now, at the end of the chain of reasoning, we find something that's not merely an instrumental reason for acting, that is preserving the life and health of his child. He's not doing that so, you know, he can put the child to work in the factory or something, we hope. He wants the child's life and health for its own sake. He's willing to work to earn the money to buy the medicine to treat the child, because he treats the life and health of the child as an end in itself. The child's life and health provide a non-instrumental, or more than merely instrumental, reason for action. So it's distinguishable from money or medicine, which is purely of instrumental value. Now, the distinction between a bare possibility and an opportunity, a very important distinction. Just considered as possible behavior, I could walk over to that window and start, beating my head against the window just for half an hour. It's possible, right? Would there be a point to it? Would I have a reason to do it? Well, I might have an instrumental reason for doing it. I might be deluded into thinking that beating your head into, I might be making a mistake. I might be making a mistake of thinking that beating your head against a window is a good way to cure a headache. I might have an instrumental reason. I might say beating my head against the window is a way to make a philosophical point. But assume that I'm beating my head against the window not to cure a headache and not to make a philosophical point, but just for its own sake. So you ask me, you say, Robbie, why are you beating your head against the window? Do you have a headache? Or that doesn't work. You can't cure a headache. Oh, no, I don't have a headache. Are you trying to illustrate a philosophical? No, I'm not trying to illustrate a. Why are you doing it? Well, for its own sake, don't you see? Now, that's a baffling answer. You're baffled. It's pointless. You know it's pointless. There is no intelligible point. If it has no instrumental value, it has no value at all. You'd be scratching your head, and you'd probably send for the white coats to take me away, get me the treatment I need. But you weren't baffled when you learned that the fellow who was working to earn the money to buy the medicine was buying the medicine to treat the kid, where treating the kid, preserving the life and health of the child, was just the end point. He wasn't doing it in order to have a healthy kid to work in the factory or something like that. It was just for the sake of the kid. You understood the point. That's not baffling. Or let's say that you learned that my friend Stefan over here had spent last evening, instead of partying with the rest of you guys, at the hospital visiting a sick friend, perhaps a friend who was so woozy from the narcotic painkillers that he was kind of going in and out of consciousness, and maybe wasn't even really aware that Stefan was there. But Stefan had done that. Now, even apart from the question of whether it's laudable for Stefan to have done that, quite apart from the question whether you would have done that, you wouldn't be baffled the way you would be baffled by my beating my head against the window for no reason other than doing it. If he went for friendship, just for friendship, you might think it's a laudable thing. You might not. You might think it's something you yourself would do. You might not, but you wouldn't be baffled. And notice that the same would be true even if someone did something immoral for the sake of friendship. So let's say that you learn that a friend has done something disgraceful. Okay, you're friends with Anthony Weiner. He's just a friend of yours. And the pictures come out, and you know they're for real. But he starts the stonewalling thing, and he starts lying and saying that Andrew Breitbart manufactured them or hacked his account, whatever. And you lie. You say to other friends who are just shocked that Weiner would do such a thing, or that our friend Tony would do such a thing, and you say, no, I know the inside scoop on this. He didn't. He's telling the truth. You know he's lying, but now you're lying, saying he's telling the truth. Now, you would think that's a wicked thing to do. I hope you would think that's a wicked. I hope you think it's immoral to lie. What Jay said yesterday is absolutely right. You cannot tell lies. But would you be baffled? Would that be not only immoral but unintelligible, baffling, perplexing? No, you see the point of the activity, even though you believe he shouldn't do it. So, in our experience of true friendship, to take just one example, we grasp by what is ordinarily an effortless exercise of what Aristotle called practical reason, the intelligible point of having and being a friend, of doing things for the sake of friendship. We understand that friendship is desirable not merely for instrumental reasons. Indeed, a purely instrumental friendship would be no friendship at all, but above all for its own sake. You can have two people who are in a perfectly morally blameless relationship, but it's not a friendship, because the only reason they're in the relationship is to advance their individual goals in a way that is more efficient than they could advance them operating separately. So you can have just two guys who go into a business together. It's not the friendship itself that they're after. That's not the motivating end. They want to produce the products, make the money, build the business, and they can do it better together than they can separately. So they pursue their individual goals cooperatively in order to pursue their individual goals more successfully. That's fine, but it's not a friendship. Now, a friendship might grow out of it, but it's not a friendship that's motivating it. If that were all there were to the story, if no friendship grew out of it, it's just Jones and Smith, and their only relationship is cooperating because they're just really efficient at making money and doing business together, then it's just not a friendship. So a purely instrumental relationship, whatever it is, and even if it's perfectly morally good, is not a friendship. You have a friendship when you're operating for the sake of the friendship, considered as something worthwhile for its own sake. Because we grasp the intelligible point of having and being a friend, and we understand that the fundamental point of friendship is friendship itself, the willing the good of the other for the sake of the other. And certainly not goals extrinsic to friendship, to which the activity of friendship is merely a means, we reasonably judge that friendship is intrinsically valuable. Now, that doesn't mean that friendship cannot also have instrumental value. You can have a relationship that's a true friendship that also has instrumental value. Because I'm friends with Ryan over here, and Ryan is really well connected with all the beautiful people in New York, I get invited to the fancy parties. Right? I can think that's great. I can think what a great side benefit of the friendship. I can value that. Right? So something that's intrinsically valuable might also have instrumental value. But something like money that's just purely instrumentally valuable doesn't have any intrinsic value. We know that friendship is then a constitutive and irreducible aspect of human well-being and fulfillment, and that precisely as such, friendship provides a reason for acting of the sort that requires for its intelligibility as a reason no further or deeper reason or subrational motivating factor to which it is a means. It's an end that provides a non-baffling answer to the question, why would you do that? Why would someone do that? Now, it doesn't have to be something that you yourself have any taste for or would elect to do. There are lots of different forms of skillful performance that provide perfectly intelligible reasons for acting that don't require for their intelligibility any further or deeper reasons or subrational motivating factors to motivate us. Some of them, some people appreciate and would actually work to develop the skill. Others wouldn't. I like playing music. Right? Not as a means to some other end, not to make money, not even to show off most of the time. I mean, I'll sit there by myself and at home watching Fox News and playing my banjo for its own sake. Now, I wouldn't watch ballet. My wife tries to get me to go to the ballet. And sometimes I do go. And I smile. And, and I try to be pleasant. And I watch them prance around up there. And I know it would be great if I could develop an appreciation for it. I'm not baffled that my wife likes ballet and is interested in it. Or that my daughter put all this effort into learning it. Even though I myself just don't have any taste for it. One's taste for it is independent of one's appreciation for its power to move people precisely by appeal to their practical reason. Now, what I've said of friendship and skillful performances like ballet or music is true if we shift our focus to the very activity that we're engaged in here today in this week, the activity of knowing itself, the activity of trying to understand things or understand things more deeply. So let's just reflect on what we're doing right here, right now. In our experience of curiosity, of wonder, of raising questions and devising strategies for obtaining correct answers and reforming incorrect views that we hold, of executing those strategies by carrying out lines of inquiry, of achieving insights, we grasp, again, by what is, for most people in most circumstances, an effortless exercise of practical reason, so effortless that we don't even notice that we're doing it. The intelligible point of searching for truth, trying to achieve understanding, and sometimes actually getting there. We understand that knowing, though it may have tremendous instrumental value, obviously knowledge enables us to build bridges and make wise investments and do all kinds of things. So knowledge can have instrumental value, but we also understand that it's intrinsically valuable. To be attentive, informed, thoughtful, clear-headed, careful in one's thinking, critical and judicious in one's judgment, is to be inherently enriched in a key dimension of human life. We reasonably judge the activity of knowing, then, to be something worthwhile for its own sake, something that, when we reflect on it philosophically, we can categorize as an intrinsic and not merely instrumental human good, a constitutive and irreducible aspect of our flourishing as human beings. Like friendship and a number of other types of activity, including some I've mentioned, but many more, knowing provides a reason for choice and action that requires for its intelligibility as a reason no further or deeper reason or sub-rational source of motivation to which it is a means. So, you know, if one of our adult children, well, you guys are too young, but those of us who have adult children comes home and says, you know, Dad, I've been working, on Wall Street for the past 3 years, and it's a good job, it's nice work, I enjoy the people I'm working with, but I've been thinking I'd really like to go back to school, apply for a PhD program at Yale to study Shakespeare, and devote the rest of my life to Shakespeare scholarship. Now, we might think that's a rather impractical thing to do. We might support our son or daughter in that, or think, no, you really better stick with the Wall Street thing. But what we wouldn't be is baffled. We wouldn't be scratching our heads, unable to figure out why anybody would do that, the way we'd be scratching our heads and baffled if someone was beating their head against the window for no reason at all. The sheer pursuit of knowledge, of understanding for its own sake, the exploration of an interesting, worthy subject for its own sake, provides a reason for acting that requires no deeper or further reason, so no ulterior motive for its intelligibility. So we can understand that knowing is, unlike beating your head against the wall, a constitutive aspect of our flourishing as human beings. Knowledge of natural law, then, as I say, is not innate. It does not swing free of experience or of the data provided by experience. Even when it is easily achieved, as it ordinarily is, practical knowledge, knowledge of natural law, is an achievement. It's an event, temporal event. It's something that one does. It's human acting. It's the fruit of insights which, like all insights, are insights into data which are supplied by experience. The insight that knowledge or knowing and that friendship is intrinsically humanly fulfilling is ultimately rooted in our elementary experiences of the activity of friendship and knowing. Without those experiences, you won't be able to have the insight. You got to have some idea of what it means to be a friend. You learn that as a little kid. Apart from those experiences, there simply would be no data on which practical reason could work to yield understanding of the intelligible point and thus of the value of friendship or knowledge and the judgment that these activities are intrinsic fulfillments of the human person and as such objects of the primary principles of practical reason and basic precepts of natural law. Human goods that correspond to what Aquinas calls the inclinations that Jay talked about yesterday in question 94-2. Of course, not all practical knowledge is moral knowledge. My little example of lying to protect your friend Anthony Weiner shows that. You're operating on the basis of an insight. That's the insight about the intelligible value of friendship, even though you're doing something immoral for the sake of that true good. So not all practical knowledge is moral knowledge. I think it's possible to say that our knowledge of the basic practical principles is moral knowledge incipiently. It's at the foundation of our moral knowledge. I'll say more about that in a minute. Though all moral knowledge is practical knowledge, that is, it is or centrally includes knowledge of principles for the direction and guidance of action. Yet knowledge of the most fundamental practical principles directing action toward what is intelligibly good and away from the privations of those goods, though not strictly speaking knowledge of moral norms. That's why I say you can only think of it as incipiently moral knowledge. It's not knowledge of moral norms. To know that friendship is something intelligibly worth pursuing, to be not baffled that someone would visit a friend in a hospital, is not itself to have knowledge of a moral norm. Although, as I say, I'm willing to say that it's incipiently moral knowledge in the sense that it's those insights that are at the foundation of our knowledge of moral norms. I'll explain. That's because moral norms are principles that guide our choices and actions in line with the primary practical principles integrally conceived. That is, in their fullness, in their wholeness, in their completeness. Norms of morality are entailments, whether we're talking about the golden rule, or do unto others as you have them do unto you, or the Pauline principle that you should never do something in itself morally evil, even for the sake of a good end, or the more specific moral norms, such as the Decalogue, the right-hand tablet of the Decalogue. Don't kill, don't steal, don't murder, you should say, don't steal, don't commit adultery, honor your father and your mother. These norms are entailments of the integral directiveness or prescriptivity of the various aspects of our human well-being and fulfillment that together constitute the ideal of integral human fulfillment. They represent what you've got to observe if you are to honor the well-being, the flourishing of human beings considered integrally, allowing yourself to be directed in your actions only by reasons provided by, and thus corresponding to the different aspects of our well-being and fulfillment as human beings, and not allow yourself to be deflected by emotion, no matter how powerful, or other motives, prejudice, anger. I guess anger is an emotion. To do things that are contrary to the human good, that direct your will or orient your will in a way that's negative toward the human good, human well-being, the flourishing of human beings in any dimension. So if the first principle of practical reason is, as Aquinas says in the question I mentioned a moment ago, that good is to be done and pursued, and bad, malum, is to be avoided, bad here being the privation of the good, then the first principle of morality, I would suggest, and this is not articulated by Aquinas, is that one ought always to choose and otherwise will in a way that is compatible with a will toward integral human fulfillment. And just as the first principle of practical reason is specified, as Aquinas makes clear, by identifying the various irreducible aspects of human well-being and fulfillment, namely friendship, knowledge, aesthetic appreciation, skillful performance, religion, and so forth. Aquinas has a more limited list, but he says quite clearly that these are just examples. So too, the first principle of morality is specified by identifying the norms of conduct that are entailed by an open-hearted love of the human good, one that is not deflected from the human good by emotion or desire or feeling or prejudice or any vice. That is the good of human persons taken as a whole. Now, as you see, then, natural law theorists of my ilk understand human fulfillment, that is the human good, as variegated. There's not just this one thing, the human good. There are many irreducible dimensions of human well-being. Now, this is not to deny that human nature is determinate. Obviously, I believe that human nature is determinate. It's to affirm that our nature, though determinate, is complex. Just consider some of the complexities of our nature, we human creatures. We are animals, we're physical organisms, right? In that respect, we're like other animals. But we're rational, as Aristotle says. Man is a rational animal. So we're organisms, we're animals, but we're rational animals. Thus, our integral good includes our bodily well-being, which explains the intelligibility of the guy who works to earn money to get medicine to treat his child. But because we are rational, our flourishing also includes our intellectual and moral and spiritual well-being. We can flourish or fail to flourish. We can flourish or decline or decay in respect of our physical lives. We can be healthy, robust, strong, or we can be, kind of sickly, dilapidated. Sometimes it's beyond our choice, but we can take action for the sake of not being dilapidated and debilitated and broken down and sickly, and for the sake of being healthy, strong, and robust. So I can take the medicine that the doctor has prescribed. I can eat a better diet. I can go work out at the gym. There are intelligible reasons for all those actions. The basic intelligible reason, the motivation, the intelligible motivation for them is to get healthy. Health considered as an aspect of the flourishing of ourselves as physical creatures. But as I say, we're also rational. We can flourish or fail to flourish in respect of our capacities for understanding. We can be sharp, attentive, on the ball, insightful, careful in our thinking, judicious in our judgment, or we can be dull-witted, slow, unintelligent, careless in our thinking, ready to believe the last thing you read in the New York Times, ready to believe anything you heard in the New York Times. And you want to be, you can understand the point of being the former rather than the latter. And there are actions you can take. You can get yourself an education. You can discipline yourself to think more critically for the sake of flourishing in respect of this dimension of our lives as humans. And we can flourish or fail to flourish in respect of our moral character, since we're moral creatures, creatures that are capable of deliberating about right and wrong and choosing what is right, even in the face of powerful temptations to do what's wrong. So you can have a guy who, is strong and robust physically, who is sharp in the sense that he's really smart, on the ball, guy who wins debates, but who's morally corrupt. We can be strong morally or we can be weak morally. And we can do things to be strong morally rather than weak morally. We can do things for our kids to help them to develop good moral characters, not bad moral characters. And that's intelligible when we do those things. It's not like beating your head against a window. There's a point to trying to make sure your kids have good character. There's a point to you trying to reform your character, repenting of past wrongdoing, trying to straighten up, get control of yourself, be a better person. How many times have you heard people say, or said it ourselves, I want to be a better person. I'm going to do things to make myself a better person. I'm going to improve my moral character. And the same is true with our spiritual lives. We can have a kind of dry spiritual life, or we can have a deep, strong interior life. And there are things you can do. Say your prayers. Attend services at the church or synagogue. Engage in the spiritual activities that have been recommended by the great saints and the heroes of religions. Try to model yourself on someone who's a great spiritual master of your faith, or to learn from him. So again, you can flourish or you can fail to flourish in that dimension. But there's more to the complexity. We are individuals. We come packaged as individual organisms with our own minds, as well as bodies. But friendship and sociability are constitutive aspects of our flourishing. We want to have friends, be friends. We want to pursue the good of relations with others, not simply because those relationships instrumentally enable us more efficiently to achieve our individual goals. We can see the point of friendship for its own sake, which is to say, we can understand now, reflecting on ourselves philosophically, that we can flourish or fail to flourish in respect of our sociability. We can be rich in friendships and good relationships, family, dear friends, good colleagues. Or we can have an impoverished life in that dimension. We can be friendless. What's that word? Misanthropic. Someone who pushes away other people. Simon and Garfunkel, Jay, I am a rock, I am an island. You can be like Ebenezer Scrooge, dilapidated in respect of this, no matter how smart, how rich, how healthy, but failing, not flourishing in respect of friendship. Or you can be like old Mr. Fezziwig. Do you remember Mr. Fezziwig from the same story? Great man, great hero of mine. Okay, the business is going to go down the tubes. The vested interests are about to swamp him. It's kind of like the Chinese today. But he's happy, and he's spending the little money he's got left on a party for all this. And he's the richest man in the world. Scrooge has got all the money, and he's impoverished because he is friendless. He's failing to flourish in this important dimension of human life. But old Fezziwig's gone broke and just the richest man in the world because he's rich in friendship and good relationships. By reflecting on the basic goods of human nature, especially those most immediately pertaining to social and political life, natural law theorists propose to arrive at a sound understanding of principles of justice, including those principles we call human rights. Now, in light of what I've already said about how natural law theorists understand human nature and the human good, it should come as no surprise to learn that natural law theorists typically reject both strict individualism and collectivism. At least natural law theorists who are within the broad classical tradition. There are libertarians today who understand themselves as natural law theorists who would embrace a fairly strict individualism, and it seems to me that this is A, unwarranted, and B, quite alien to the broader tradition. Individualism, at least its radical sort of Ayn Randian form, overlooks the intrinsic value of human sociability and tends mistakenly to view human beings as, well, atomistically, and to see human relationships essentially instrumentally. Yeah, sure, people form relationships, but the point of forming the relationships is for each party to the relationship to advance his own goals and interests in a way that's better, more, than he could operating individually. So they're alliances more than friendships in the rich, old-fashioned Aristotelian sense. Collectivism compromises the dignity of human beings by tending to instrumentalize and subordinate them and their well-being to the interests of larger social units. So the individual and his flourishing is relegated to essentially instrumental status in the service of the Volk, or the fatherland, or the Duce, or the Führer, or the future communist utopia. So Mao says, in order to make an omelet, you got to break eggs. Those eggs are the real lives of human beings, considered not as persons with worth and dignity and inviolability, but just as means to the larger collective goals. Now, individualists and collectivists both have theories of justice and even human rights. When Jay and I were kids in college, one of the big debates within Marxism, and at least where I was, Jay, I don't know about you, Marxism was the dominant school of thought in political philosophy. One of the big debates within Marxism was between those who thought that you could have a Marxist moral theory and even a Marxist theory of human rights, and those who didn't. That was an in-house debate. You can probably remember some of those books and articles from those days. And I think that, it was a kind of an interesting debate, and those who argued for a Marxist theory of human rights had interesting things to say. But I think that their theories of justice in the end, even for those who thought you could have a Marxist theory of justice, which the Marxists on the other side said you couldn't, for reasons that are obvious if you know anything about Marx's own teaching. Whether they were radical individualists who also proposed theories of justice, after all, it seems to me that these theories are unsatisfactory. They're rooted in important misunderstandings of human nature and the human good. Neither, it seems to me, can do justice to this really central key concept, the concept of a human person. That is, a rational animal who is a locus of intrinsic value and as such an end in himself, who may never legitimately treat himself or be treated by others as a mere means, treat himself or be treated by others, something that the individualists are going to reject. They think you can treat yourself however you want. But whose well-being intrinsically includes relationships with others and memberships in communities in which he or she has, as a matter of justice, both rights and ordinarily responsibilities. I only have that little qualifier ordinarily in there because there are at the edges some human beings who have rights even though they have no responsibilities. Unborn babies, newborn babies, severely, congenitally, mentally debilitated. The kind of people Peter Singer would say it's okay to kill. They don't have responsibilities, but they certainly do have rights. But for most of us, we have responsibilities as well as rights. Human rights exist, it seems to me, if it's the case that there are principles of practical reason directing us to act or abstain from acting in certain ways out of respect for the well-being and the dignity of persons whose legitimate interests may be affected by what we do. Now, I certainly believe that there are such principles. They cannot be overridden by considerations of utility, whatever utility means. At a very general level, they direct us, in Kant's phrase, to treat human beings always as ends and never as means only. It seems to me that that little Enlightenment formulation is perfectly consistent with the classical tradition of natural law thinking. It sort of captures an important insight about the inviolability of the human person. Now, of course, some people think we ought not to talk in terms of rights, that already buys into a kind of individualism that is inconsistent with a view of justice that is serious about the idea of the common good. Some people think that Christians in particular, I myself am a Christian, should not be talking about rights. We should abandon the language of rights. What's Oliver O'Donovan's wife's name? Joan Lockwood O'Donovan is a Christian political philosopher who strongly believes this. I mean, she's extremely critical of the use of rights language. She thinks we buy into the whole liberal individualist paradigm by using the language of rights. Well, I don't agree. She and I had a lively debate about this in person once at a conference, and I just am unpersuaded by that. Now, I agree that the language of rights can be abused. It has been abused. It is abused by people who want to do all of political philosophy in terms of rights, or think that the only moral norms there are rights claims. And obviously, people have inflated rights claims that claim a right to anything and everything. Or there are plenty of people who talk about rights entirely independently of any talk about responsibilities or obligations, and that's no good. But I agree with Mary Ann Glendon, who, while criticizing all those abuses of rights language and warning that you shouldn't fall into the trap of trying to do moral analysis or even the analysis of justice issues entirely in rights talk, it seems to me that the language of rights is a supple and useful language for analysis if you're rigorous about it and if you're careful to avoid the pitfalls that Mary Ann herself in the book Rights Talk acknowledges and criticizes. Well, when we begin to specify this general norm, which we can put in Kantian terms or not, we identify important negative duties such as the duty to refrain from enslaving people. Although we need not put the matter in terms of rights, it's perfectly reasonable and I believe helpful to speak of a right against being enslaved and to speak of slavery as a violation of human rights. Joan O'Donovan doesn't agree. But I think that's perfectly reasonable and helpful. Now, you don't have to, right? Any proposition put in terms of rights can be translated into non-rights talk. It can be done. And certainly not every moral claim can easily or comfortably be translated into rights talk. I agree with all that. So the right against being enslaved is a right that people have not by virtue of being members of a certain race or sex or class or ethnic group, but simply by virtue of our humanity. In that sense, it is a human right. You get it by being human. But there are, in addition to negative duties and their corresponding rights, certain positive duties. And these too are sometimes articulated and discussed in the language of rights, though here it is especially important that we be clear about by whom and how a given alleged right is to be honored. Here's where the language of rights, I think, really starts to go out of whack, is people will just toss around these rights claims as rhetorical devices for winning arguments, not actually trying to get at the truth of things. Sometimes it's said, for example, that education or health care is a human right, like you've heard this a zillion times in the past few years. Now, I don't think it's actually unreasonable to speak in this way. I'm willing to have a debate about this on the merits, but much more needs to be said, and here's the only point I want to make to you today on this. Much more needs to be said than education is a human right or health care is a human right, if it's to be a meaningful statement. The trouble so often is these claims are not even meaningful claims. Forget whether they're right or wrong. They're not even meaningful. Who is supposed to provide education or health care to whom? Unless you're going to tell me that, you're going to give me an argument for your position on that, it's useless for you to tell me, oh, education is a human right. All right, and if you do tell me who's supposed to provide health care or education to whom, why should those persons or institutions be the providers? You got to answer that question. What place should the provision of education or health care, whoever's supposed to provide it, to whomever, occupy on the list of social and political priorities? When we're in this domain, we're talking about the use of limited resources. Money could go to a swimming pool, recreation center, to a library, even if we're assuming for the moment that the money is the government's to spend to advance the common good. Well, why or when should it go to education and not recreation? Or health care instead of education? Or health care instead of recreation? Or recreation instead of health care? Is it better for education or health care to be provided by governments under socialized systems or by private providers in markets? If all you're saying to me when you say health care is a human right is, I think government should provide health care, well, better to say it the straightforward way and dismiss all the moralistic stuff about human rights. Now, these questions that I've demanded answers to, if people are going to speak in terms of human rights when it comes to these alleged positive obligations, these questions go, and there are many more that we could ask, and they all go beyond here's my main point, go beyond the application of moral principles. They can't answer these questions simply by appealing to moral principles. They require prudential judgments of various sorts that have to be made in light of the contingent circumstances people face in a given society at a given point of time. Often there is not a single uniquely correct answer. Usually there's not a correct answer, a uniquely morally correct answer to the question, well, we've got, let's just assume that we got money that's in the hands of the government, it's going to stay in the hands of the government, it shouldn't be returned to the people. Assume that much. Now what are we going to do with it? The kids in the town could use a recreation center. It'd be great to have some basketball courts. We need midnight basketball, remember that? A swimming pool, the old one's too small, it's kind of run down. But, we also could use a library. We don't have a library. And a lot of the elderly folks in the community really would like to spend time in having a nice library. It would be really good for them. There's not a right answer to that, a morally right answer to that question. That's a choice between morally acceptable possibilities that are mutually exclusive. You got to go one way or another, or do something else with the money. But it can't be dictated simply by a moral norm. The answer to each question can lead to further questions, and the problems can be extremely complex, far more complex than the issue of slavery, where once a right has been identified, its universality and the basic terms of its application are fairly clear. Everybody has a moral right not to be enslaved. It's what it means to be a person, to have dignity. And everybody has an obligation as a matter of strict justice to refrain from enslaving others. Governments have a moral obligation to respect and protect the right not to be enslaved. So if one private citizen enslaves another private citizen, the government has an obligation to make sure that that gets set right. The guy guilty of kidnapping is punished. And correspondingly to enforce the obligation. Now, what I've said so far will provide a pretty good idea, I hope, of how I think we ought to go about identifying what are human rights. But in each case, the argument must be made, and in many cases, there are complexities to the argument. One basic human right that almost all natural law theorists of all schools would say belongs in the set is the right of an innocent person not to be directly killed or maimed. Now, there may be a debate within the natural law camp about exactly what we mean by directly, a debate at least at the edges. Deliberately, intentionally, as the object of one's choice. But all would agree that direct killing of innocent human beings is always and everywhere wrong. Falls into the category that Jay applied yesterday with respect to lying. This is a right that's violated when someone makes the death or injury of another person the precise object of his action. It's the right that grounds the norm against targeting non-combatants, even in justified wars, and against abortion, euthanasia, the killing of hostages, and so forth. Of course, in the case of abortion, some people argue that human beings in the embryonic or fetal stages of development do not yet qualify as persons and so do not possess human dignity or human rights. This is, of course, famously the view defended by Peter Singer, although he himself, for perfectly good utilitarian reasons, avoids the language of rights. But he would say that a human being who's not a person, he thinks you can have human beings who are not persons, is not protected by whatever the norms are that ordinarily, but not always, make it wrong to kill an individual. Similarly, in the case of euthanasia, some, again Singer and others, argue that permanently comatose or severely retarded or demented people do not qualify as rights bearers or no longer qualify as rights bearers. So on this view, you can have pre-personal human beings in the embryonic or fetal or infant stages. As someone mentioned yesterday, Singer's argued that even under the law, you could have a 28-day period when it would be permissible to kill newborn babies. Or post-personal human beings who were once persons but are no longer persons, the demented, the severely mentally handicapped. Or human beings who never were persons, aren't now persons, and never will be persons, people who are congenitally severely mentally disabled. And those who do speak in the language of rights, who adopt a view like this, like Ronnie Dworkin, would say that those human beings are not rights bearers. Only persons are rights bearers. Not all human beings are persons. Now, I think these claims are mistaken, but I'd say the least. But I won't here go into my reasons for holding that the moral status of a human being does not depend on his or her age or size or stage of development or condition of dependency. I presented this argument in great detail in numerous places, including my recent book with Chris Tollefson called Embryo: A Defense of Human Life, soon to be out in a second edition. Here I will say only that people who do not share with me the conviction that human beings in early stages of development and in severely debilitated conditions are rights bearers may nevertheless agree that whoever qualifies as a person is protected by the norm against the direct killing of the innocent. Here Ronald Dworkin would consider himself enough of a natural law theorist to join me. Peter Singer wouldn't, because he doesn't believe that it makes sense to speak in the language of rights at all. So he doesn't subscribe to the norm that Dworkin would accept, that the norm that says you shouldn't ever kill a person, because he believes persons are rights bearers. Singer thinks that under certain circumstances it's okay to kill an innocent person, where the utilitarian calculation generates that result, whether the greater good or lesser evil is to be secured by taking the life of an innocent human being. Now, the natural law understanding of human rights I'm here sketching is connected with a particular account of human dignity, and I owe it to you to put that on the table to see whether you agree or not. Under this account of human dignity, the natural human capacities for reason and freedom. Freedom here is not, I don't mean in the political sense, I mean to be an agent, are fundamental to the dignity of human beings, the dignity that is protected by human rights. The essential goods of human nature, the basic goods of human nature, are the goods of a rational creature. That is, a creature whose nature is a rational nature. A creature, that is, who, unless impaired or prevented from doing so, whether by disease or by violence, taking the life of an unborn child in an abortion or a newborn infant or something like that, naturally develops and exercises capacities for deliberation, judgment, and choice. Self-transcending capacities. Capacities, as I'll explain in a moment, that enable one to transcend the domain of causality. These capacities these capacities are, I want to suggest, as I suggested in the seminar yesterday that I led after Jay's talk, God-like, albeit, of course, in a limited way. We're not God. We are caused to be. God is uncaused. But like God, we are capable of causing things. We are not caused to cause. We are free and rational. We can act on the basis of reasons freely to bring into existence states of affairs that, but for our deliberation, judgment, and choice, would not be brought into being. From the theological vantage point, these capacities constitute a certain, limited to be sure, but real, sharing in divine power. This, as I suggested in the seminar, is what is meant, I believe, by the otherwise extraordinarily puzzling biblical teaching that man is made in the very image and likeness of God. But whether or not one recognizes biblical authority or even believes in a personal God, that is, a God who is himself an agent, it's true that human beings possess a power traditionally ascribed to divinity, namely the power to cause things one is not caused to cause, the power to literally transcend causality, to partially constitute oneself and shape the world around one by one's free and intelligent choices, one's choices for reasons, choices that one makes not as a result of external forces pressing on one, nor as a result of internal compulsions, where one is driven by instinct or impulse alone. This is the power to envisage a possible state of affairs, to grasp the value of bringing it into being, the intelligible point of performing the activity, and to bring it into being. That state of affair, and to act by choice to bring it into being, not as a brute animal would by instinct or impulse. That state of affairs may be anything from the development of an intellectual or other type of skill, or the attainment of an item of knowledge, the exploration of Shakespeare or natural law theory or mathematics, to the creation or critical appreciation of a work of art or ballet or chess or kayaking, to the establishment of friendships at various levels, and even marital communion. The couple who get married envisage a possible state of affairs that does not exist, their marital bond, their marital communion. They understand the point, the value of bringing into existence, the more than merely instrument. It's not just a deal, instrumental value of bringing it into existence. And then they act freely by choice on the basis of their rational grasp of the point of bringing this marital friendship into existence, to bring it into existence. They're not like the stag and the doe. As romantic as the stag and the doe may be, they're not establishing marital communion. And they can't, because they're not rational agents. They get the job done, but it's not love and it's not marriage. It's more the moral and cultural significance of whatever one brings into existence, and we do it every day. This isn't some, you don't do natural law just on the big occasions. Every day. We act freely and reasonably every day on the basis of principles we don't give 3 seconds reflection to, but which we've got and we grasp and we act on the basis of. So its cultural significance may be very great, your Leonardo painting the Mona Lisa, or far more commonly comparatively minor. You're getting through the day, you're doing your stuff, you're raising your kids, you're teaching your classes, you're doing your work, you're doing whatever you do, you're socializing. You're watching a football game, you're watching a ballet if you're my wife. What matters for the point I'm now making is that it's a product of human reason and freedom. It's the fruit of deliberation, judgment, and choice. Of course, a further question will present itself to the mind of anyone who recognizes the God-likeness of our capacities for rationality and freedom, capacities that are immaterial and spiritual in nature. That question is whether beings capable of such powers could exist apart from a divine source and ground of their being. So one finds in the affirmation of these powers a decisive ground for the rejection of materialism, and one discerns the basis of an openness to, and even the roots of an argument for, theism. But more on that in just a little while. Now, what about the authority for this view of human nature, the human good, human dignity, and human rights? Natural law theorists are interested in the intelligible reasons people have for their actions. We're particularly interested in reasons that can be identified without appeal to any authority apart from the authority of reason itself. This is not to deny that it is often reasonable to recognize and submit to authority of various types, including religious authority and secular authority, like the authority of law, deciding what to do and not do. Indeed, natural law theorists have made, I think it's fair to say, very important contributions to understanding why and how people can sometimes be morally bound to submit to and be guided in their actions by authority of various types. Think, for example, of Yves Simone's work, or John Finnis's work, or Elizabeth Anscombe's work on authority. But even here, the special concern of natural law theorists is with the reasons people have, sometimes conclusive reasons people have, for recognizing and honoring claims of authority. We do not simply appeal to authority to justify authority. That, on a natural law count, would just be an illicit move. One might then ask whether human beings are in fact rational in anything more than an instrumental sense. And here we get to the most radical critique of natural law theory. Can we really, as I'm assuming we can, as I've been assuming we can, but is it true? Can we really discern any intelligible reasons for human choices and actions? Well, everybody recognizes that some ends or purposes pursued through human action are intelligible, at least insofar as they provide means to ends. We all believe that they're instrumental goods. We all believe that they're instrumental reasons for action. So, for example, people work to earn money, and their doing so is perfectly rational. Money is a valuable means to many important ends. No one doubts its instrumental value. The question is whether some ends or purposes are intelligible as providing more than merely instrumental reasons. Are there intrinsic, in other words, are there intrinsic as well as instrumental goods? Skeptics deny that there are intelligible ends or purposes that make possible rationally motivated action. Natural law theorists, by contrast, hold that friendship and knowledge and critical aesthetic appreciation and the development of skills, certain other ends or purposes are intrinsically valuable. They are intelligibly choice-worthy, not simply as means to other ends, but as ends in themselves. They cannot be reduced to, nor can their intelligible appeal be accounted for exclusively in terms of emotion or feeling or desire or any other subrational motivating factors. These basic human goods are constitutive aspects of the well-being and fulfillment of human persons and the communities they form, and they thereby provide the foundations, as I've argued, of moral judgments, including our judgments pertaining to justice and human rights. Now, of course, there are plenty of people today who embrace philosophical or ideological doctrines that deny the human capacities I maintain are at the core of human dignity. They adopt a purely instrumental and essentially non-cognitivist view of practical reason and argue that the human experience of deliberation, judgment, and choice is illusory. The kind of classic statement of the view is in Hume, where Hume provides an alternative to the Aristotelian account of practical reason, an account that reduces practical reason to a purely instrumental role. And Hume had this really wonderfully colorful way of putting it. Hume said that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and may pretend to no office other than to serve and obey them. Well, that's the skeptical option. There's the alternative if you dismiss the Aristotelian view. The ends people pursue, our Humean friends insist, are ultimately given by non-rational motivating factors such as feeling, emotion, desire. Here Hume is really not just inventing, so he's picking up a line from Hobbes, I think, his great predecessor. You remember that passage, I know a lot of political theorists are here, so you've read your Hobbes. You remember that passage in Hobbes where he articulates essentially the same view about practical reason. He says that the thoughts are to the desires as scouts and spies to range abroad and find the way to the thing desired. Again, the purely instrumental conception of practical reason. On this account, this Hobbesian Humean account, truly rationally motivated action is simply impossible for creatures like us. We have the experience of acting for reasons, ultimate reasons, non-instrumental reasons, but it's an illusion. We have the experience of acting freely, but it's just an illusion. Free choice, strictly speaking, doesn't exist, because for free choice to exist, people would have to have and be aware of and be able to act on more than merely instrumental reason. Since they can't, their behavior is ultimately caused, whether by external forces operating on one, or more likely in most cases by internal forces, desire, feeling, emotion, that dictate ends, and reason's role is simply the ingenious servant or the scout or spy to range abroad and find the way to fulfill the desire. So Hitler has his desires, Mother Teresa has her desires. Reason can't adjudicate between the two. Reason's role is purely instrumental. Hitler wants to push a lot of Jews into ovens. Well, your reason can show him how to be more efficient about pushing Jews into ovens. Mother Teresa wants to rescue or bring comfort to dying people in the streets of Calcutta. Reason can't tell her that that's a better thing to do than pushing Jews into ovens like Hitler likes to do. But it can tell Mother Teresa how to be more efficient, how to do it better, how to bring more comfort to people on the streets. That's what she wants to do on the streets of Calcutta. On this account, there are no more than merely instrumental reasons, no basic human goods. Now, if proponents, advocates of this non-cognitivist and subjectivist view of human action are right, then it seems to me that the entire business of ethics is a charade and human dignity is just a myth, and I wish they would admit it instead of trying to cook up ways to build a moral theory out of a non-cognitivist account of action and agency. But I don't think they are right. Indeed, I don't think that they can give any account of the norms of rationality to which they must themselves appeal in making the case against reason and freedom that is consistent with the denial that people are capable of more than merely instrumental rationality and true freedom of choice. This argument, this retorsive argument against the Hobbesian Humean position is made very well by a book that was co-authored in the mid-'70s by Chris Tollefson's late father, Olaf Tollefson, together with Germaine Grisey and Joseph Boyle, called Free Choice, a Self-Referential Argument. That's still a really fine book to read on the question of humanism and the abandonment of belief in free choice. Now, having said all this, I don't deny that emotion figures in human action. Obviously, it does. It's not as if these two alternatives are the one in which emotion does all the motivating work, and the other one in which reason by itself does all that needs to be done, and there's no emotion figuring in motivation. Those are false alternatives. On many occasions, emotion does the main work of motivation. But in some cases, while it's present and relevant, reason also has a role. In some cases, we want things not as sheer brute desires, but the desire itself is the fruit of our intelligent grasp of the intelligible point of the activity. So I maintain that people can have and often do have basic reasons for their acting, reasons provided by ends they understand as choice-worthy, as intelligible, as having a humanly fulfilling, and desire precisely as such, which doesn't necessarily mean they're going to pursue them in a morally upright way. The lying for a friend example shows that. But my point at this level is only to show that these ends too figure in motivation. Now, if I and other natural law theorists are correct in affirming that human reason can identify human rights as genuine grounds of obligations to others, how can we explain or understand widespread failures to recognize and respect human rights and other moral principles? Often moral skeptics are throwing up the whole history of human abuses of other human beings, as if that disproved that there could actually be anything like ethics or even practical reasoning. Well, as human beings, we are rational animals, but we are imperfectly rational. We are prone to making intellectual and moral mistakes and capable of behaving grossly unreasonably, especially when deflected by powerful emotions that run contrary to the demands of reasonableness. Christians, of course, have a name for this: sin. And another name, fallenness. Other religions are similar in that they're under no illusions about human perfection. A conscientious judgment, even when we're following, what I'm saying here is we suffer weakness of will and darkness of intellect. I mean, sometimes we know what the right thing to do is, but we're weak in the will and can't do it. Other times, I think Jake referred to this as the noetic consequences of sin. I mean, other times, our fallenness actually darkens our ability to see the truth of certain moral principles, or their applicability in the circumstances that we're in, where the temptation is to do something that is contrary to those principles. Even when following our consciences, as we're morally bound to do, we can go wrong. A judgment made in good conscience may nevertheless be erroneous. Of course, sometimes people fail to recognize and respect human rights because they have self-interested motives for doing so. In most cases of exploitation, for example, the fundamental failing is moral, not intellectual. In some cases, though, intellectual and moral failures are closely connected. Selfishness, prejudice, partisanship, vanity, avarice, lust, ill will, and other moral delinquencies can, in ways that are sometimes quite subtle, as we all know from our own experience, impede sound ethical judgments, including judgments pertaining to human rights. Whole cultures or subcultures can be infected with moral failings that blind large numbers of people to truths about justice and human rights, and ideologies hostile to these truths will almost always be both causes and effects of these failings. Let me read you that sentence again, because when I deliver this sentence in kind of mainstream academic audiences that are dominated by liberals, I always get this gasp when I deliver the sentence. Whole cultures or subcultures can be infected with moral failings that blind large numbers of people to truths about human justice and human rights. And ideologies hostile to these truths will almost always be both causes and effects of these failings. And I'll see like veins bulging from the neck. And then I'll deliver the following sentence. Consider, for example, the case of slavery in the antebellum American South. The ideology of white supremacy was both a cause of many people's blindness to the wickedness of slavery and an effect of the exploitation and degradation of the slaves. Now let's turn, as I promised I would, more fully to the question of God and religious faith in natural law theory. Most, although not all, contemporary natural law theorists are theists, mostly Christians, but also Jews and some Jews and Muslims. Jay mentioned yesterday the great Jewish natural law theorist, Rabbi David Novak. Even Jewish authorities who do not claim the mantle, as David does, of natural law thinking, often do work that is recognizable to those in the natural law tradition as work within the tradition. One thinks, Jay, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Rabbi J. David Bleish, the great Orthodox bioethicist and moral thinker, whose work is tremendous and whose work clearly is within this tradition, or the late Emanuel Jacobowitz, the chief rabbi of Britain. Some of his work in bioethics is similarly fits comfortably into the tradition. In any event, they believe, whether they're Christians or Muslims, especially Shia Muslims, who seem to have a particular room in their tradition for natural law thinking, they believe that the moral order, like every other order in human experience, is what it is because God creates and sustains it as such. In accounting for the intelligibility of the created order in all of its dimensions, they infer the existence of a free and creative intelligence, a personal God. They argue that God's creative free choice provides the only ultimately satisfactory account of the existence of the intelligibilities humans grasp in every domain of inquiry, and not just in ethics. In those sciences that study the order of nature, in physics and chemistry and biology, or those sciences that study descriptively study human affairs like sociology or economics or political science, or in the humanities, other disciplines, or in the study of logic itself, or the studies in the domain of what Aristotle called techne, the technical science, engineering, building buildings, building bridges. Natural law theorists do not deny that God can reveal moral truths, and most believe that God has chosen to reveal many such truths. However, natural law theorists also affirm that many moral truths, including some that are revealed, can also be grasped by ethical reflection apart from revelation. They assert, here I'm echoing Jay yet again, with St. Paul, that there is a law written on the hearts even of the Gentiles who do not know the law of Moses, a law the knowledge of which is sufficient for moral accountability, even judgment. So the basic norms against murder and theft, for example, though revealed in the Decalogue, are knowable even apart from God's special revelation. The natural law can be known by us, and we can conform our conduct to its terms by virtue of our natural human capacities for deliberation, judgment, and choice. The absence of a divine source of natural law would be a puzzling thing, just as the absence of a divine source of any and every other intelligible order in human experience would be a puzzling thing. The order that makes possible the study of nature by astronomy or physics, or the order that makes possible logic, or the order that makes possible engineering. An atheist's puzzlement might well cause him to reconsider the idea that there is no divine source of the order we perceive and understand in the universe. This is what happened most recently and famously, although it's happened in many, many cases, in the case of Anthony Flew. He doesn't go all the way to Judaism or Christianity, but he says, look, at the end of the day, I've got to reconsider the atheism that I've made my whole career defending, because I got to come up with some non-puzzling account of the sources of order that we find in all domains, not just the moral domain, but all domains of human inquiry. It's far less likely, I think, to cause someone to conclude that our perception is illusory or that our understanding is a sham, though that's certainly logically possible. The question then arises, can natural law, assuming that there are true principles of natural law, provide common moral and even political ground for people who do not agree on the existence or the nature of God and the role of God in human affairs? In my view, anybody who acknowledges the human capacities for reason and freedom has good grounds for affirming human dignity and basic human rights. So my atheist friend at Princeton, Jeff Stout, for example, one of Ryan's teachers, he and I don't agree on the God question. But since he is as willing as I am to acknowledge the human capacities for reason and choice, and to see these as the grounds of human dignity, in other words, he sees men as godlike, although he doesn't believe in God. He sees men as human beings as having the capacities that are attributed to God. He sees human beings as capable of transcending the domain of causality. seems to me he's got perfectly good grounds for affirming human dignity and human rights, which he does. Now, explaining how there could be such reasonable judgments, we would part ways. I would give a theistic account. He would say, well, it's just all a great mystery. I don't think theism works, but it's all a great mystery. Or someone who's a non-theist religious person like a Buddhist, who rejects materialism, even though doesn't have a theistic account of ultimate reality, could affirm grounds of human dignity similar to those that I have identified. Now, these grounds remain in place whether or not one adverts to the question, is there a divine source of the moral order whose tenets we discern in inquiry regarding natural law and natural rights? As I say, I happen to think the answer to that question is yes, and that we should therefore be open to the possibility that God has revealed himself in ways that reinforce and supplement what can be known by unaided reason. It seems to me that the minute you drop the materialism thing, you're starting to open yourself up, and you should open yourself up to the question of whether there is any communication from more than merely human sources of meaning and value to us human beings. So you start asking questions, about historical claims that are made in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, or claims that are made by those representing Islam or other traditions. But we need not agree on the answer, so long as we agree that God or no God. So long as we agree about the truths that give rise to the question, namely that human beings possessing godlike, literally awesome, the kids overuse the word, but here it's the right word, awesome powers of reason and freedom, the power to transcend the domain of causality, are bearers of a profound dignity that is protected by basic rights. So if there is a set of moral norms, including norms of justice and human rights, that can be known by rational inquiry, understanding, and judgment, even apart from any special revelation, then these norms of natural law can, it seems to me, provide the basis for at least some common understanding or discussion of human rights among Christians, Jews, Muslims, at least some in the Muslim tradition, or some traditions of Islam, Buddhism, or at least some traditions of Buddhism, even non-believers, even in the absence of religious agreement. So I think that the discussions that are going on between the Vatican, for example, and the Islamic scholars who responded to the Pope's challenge at his speech in Regensburg are good. I think that's a good discussion. I think that's a possible discussion. That's a meaningful discussion. They've got some things to talk about, short of deciding who's right or who's wrong about whether Jesus was the Son of God or Muhammad was the prophet. Of course, we should not expect consensus. We're not going to get it. There are moral skeptics who deny that there are any moral truths. There are religious fideists and in lots of different traditions, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, who hold that moral truths cannot be known apart from God's special revelation. And even among those who believe in natural law, there will be differences of opinion about its precise content and implications for certain issues. So it is, I believe, our permanent condition to discuss and debate these issues, both as a matter of abstract philosophy and as a matter of practical politics. Now, it's sometimes regarded as an embarrassment to natural law thinking that some of the great ancient and medieval figures in the tradition failed to recognize, and indeed have even denied, human rights that are affirmed by contemporary natural law theorists, folks like Jay or myself, and even regarded as fundamental. Consider, for example, the basic right to religious liberty. This right was not widely acknowledged in the past, in the tradition, and was even denied by some prominent natural law theorists. As John Finnis, one of my own teachers, has observed, they wrongly believed that a wide conception of liberty in matters of faith presupposed religious relativism or indifferentism, or entailed that religious vows were immoral or non-binding, or the comprehensive subservience of ecclesial communities to the state. In other words, they understood religious liberty to mean what the French revolutionaries said religious liberty was. It's interesting, especially in light of that comment, that when the Catholic Church put itself on record firmly in support of the right to religious freedom in the document Dignitatis Humanae of the Second Vatican Council, it presented both a natural law argument, that's the first half of the document, and an argument from specifically theological sources, that's the second half of the argument. And this was the Catholic Church moving from a rather thin belief in religious freedom, which it had held previously, to a quite robust view that any Baptist would be pleased with. The natural law argument for religious freedom in the document is founded on the obligation of each person to pursue the truth about religious matters and to live in conformity with his conscientious judgments. This obligation is in turn rooted in the proposition that religion, considered as conscientious truth-seeking regarding the ultimate sources of meaning and value, and conscientious living in light of one's best judgments, is itself a crucial dimension of human well-being and fulfillment. It's among the basic human goods that provide rational motivation for our choosing, the non-instrumental or more than merely instrumental reasons for acting that are constitutive of our flourishing as human beings. The right to religious liberty follows from the dignity of man. That's why the document is entitled Dignitatis Humanae, the dignity of man as a conscientious truth seeker. This right and other human rights are denied and attacked today from various quarters and in many parts of the world are routinely violated. The ideological justification for their denial and violation can be religious or secular. In some parts of the world, religious freedom and other basic human rights are denied in the name of theological truth. We all have plenty of knowledge of that. In other parts of the world, such as Europe and in the elite sector of the culture here in the U.S., the threats are from secularist ideologies. Where secularist ideologies are liberal in form, like in Western Europe and in the elite sector of the culture in the United States, as opposed to, say, Marxist in form, it often claims to an overarching right to autonomy that are asserted to justify choices, actions, and policies that natural law theorists believe are unjust and undermine the common good, including impositions on the consciences of believers who would rather not participate in performing abortions or be the photographers at same-sex weddings and things like that. If the natural law view of these matters is correct, then it is moral failings conspiring with intellectual errors that sustain ideologies that compromise these and other human rights. In a certain sense, the failings are at opposite poles, yet from a natural law vantage point, partisans of the competing ideologies make some valid criticisms of each other. Radical Islamists, for example, harshly condemn the decadent features of cultures in which an ideology of expressive and/or possessive individualism flourishes. On the other side, expressive individualists denounce the subjugation of women and the oppression of religious dissenters where fundamentalist Islam holds sway. As natural law theorists see it, threats to human dignity and human rights exist because all of us, as human beings, are imperfectly reasonable and imperfectly moral. To put it in Christian terms, we are fallen creatures, we are sinners. At the same time, hope exists because we really do possess the capacities for reasonableness and virtue. Truth, including moral truth, is accessible to us and has its own splendor and powerful appeal. We will never in this vale of tears grasp the truth completely or in a way that's entirely free from errors, nor will we, fallen creatures, fully live up to the moral truths we grasp, whether as individuals or as cultures. But just as we made progress by abolishing the evil of slavery, by ending legally sanctioned segregation, by recognizing the right to religious freedom, and by turning away from the eugenics policies once favored by so many respectable people, though those, alas, are coming back, natural law theorists hope that we can make progress and reverse declines in other areas. Oh, Kelly, is it time?
Yes.
Okay. Of course, people who reject the natural law understanding of human dignity, say I just say yes and then go on, reject the natural law understanding of human dignity and human rights will differ from natural law theorists on the question of what constitutes progress and decline. From an Islamist point of view, a radical Islamist point of view, the type of religious freedom defended by natural law theorists will be regarded as licensing heresy and religious irresponsibility. Why should we tolerate blasphemers? Natural law ideas will be seen as just a rhetorically toned down form of Western secularism. Now, this is not for all Muslims by any means. I'm talking here about fundamentalist or radical Islamists. By contrast, from a liberal secularist point of view, natural law ideas about abortion, sexuality, and other hot-button moral issues will be regarded as intolerant and oppressive, a philosophically gussied up form of religious fundamentalism. Right? They say this all the time. People like Jay and me, we're fundamentalists. In the end, though, natural law ideas like Islamist or liberal secularist ideas will have to stand or fall on their own merits, at least in the domain of philosophical discussion. Anyone who wonders whether they are sound or unsound will have to consider the arguments offered in their support and the counter-arguments advanced by their critics. I'll close. So many other things to say. Couple of quick ones. Got it. Quick one here. I will. Good. Okay, one of the things I want to address, two things I want to address before closing. One is the relationship between natural law theory, at least as I do it, and the main competitors in the domain of ethics. I already said as much as I'm going to say about skepticism, but I want to talk about utilitarianism and what's sometimes called deontologism, or the Kantian approach. And then I want to say a word about virtue, because I've said very little about it today, if anything. And of course Aquinas says an awful lot about it in relation to his thought on ethics. So let me say a word about the ways that natural law theories are both like and unlike utilitarian and other consequentialist approaches to morality on the one hand, and the Kantian or deontological approaches on the other. Like utilitarian approaches, and unlike Kantian ones, natural law theories are fundamentally concerned with human well-being and fulfillment, and indeed take basic human goods as the starting points of ethical reflection. Unlike utilitarian approaches, however, natural law theorists understand the basic forms of human good as they figure in options for morally significant choosing as incommensurable in ways that render senseless the utilitarian strategy of choosing the option that overall and in the long run promises to conduce to the net best proportion of benefit to harm, however benefit and harm may be understood and defined. So if we think about what in the tradition are identified, the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition, are identified as the four orders in which human beings can reach understanding, the four orders of intelligibility, the order of nature, which we find over against ourselves but we don't in any way make, the order of logic, the order of practical reasoning, and the order of the technical order. Natural law utilitarians want to locate ethical thinking in the fourth order, in the order of technique. They want to make ethics a science, indeed a technical science. It's a matter of calculation, weighing and measuring. So the master norm of ethics is choose that option among the possibilities that overall and in the long run promises to produce the net best proportion of benefit to harm. What's there not to like about that? Well, from a natural law theorist's point of view, it just misplaces ethics. It sees it as a fourth order inquiry. But that's not where the intelligibility of practical principles and moral norms is in fact to be found. Natural law theorists share then with Kantians the rejection of aggregative accounts of morality that regard the achievement of sufficiently good consequences or the avoidance of sufficiently bad ones as justifying choices that would be excluded by application of moral norms or principles in ordinary circumstances. Unlike Kantians, however, they do not believe that moral norms can be identified and justified apart from a consideration of the integral directiveness of the principles of practical reason directing human choice and action toward what is humanly fulfilling, is intelligible as such, and away from what is contrary to human well-being. Natural law theorists do not believe in purely deontological moral norms. Practical reasoning is about both the right and the good, to recall that Rawlsian distinction. And the two are connected. You've seen this in what I've said already. They're connected how? Well, it's this way. The content of the human good shapes moral norms inasmuch as such norms are entailments of the basic aspects of human well-being and fulfillment considered integrally. So while a natural law theorist is going to identify, at least of my ilk, is going to identify moral judgment, moral inquiry, the intelligibilities that are the basic principles of practical reason and their integral directiveness in the third order, the Kantian would try to locate them in the second order. Now, Angela was pressing Hadley. When Hadley was here the other day in our seminar, I don't know if it happened in the general session, I just came in the end, but in the seminar, Angela was pressing Hadley. She didn't put it in these terms, so I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think they're the right ones. Essentially to say, Hadley, where are you placing the intelligibility of moral norms? Is it in the logical order, the second order? In other words, are you a Kantian? Or is that somewhere else? You're plainly not understanding it being in the fourth order, because you're not a utilitarian. You clearly reject utilitarianism. Is it in the second order? Or is it sort of in some combination of the second order and the first order? Or is it really in the third order? Finally, let me conclude with one more proposition that's stressed by natural law theorists. Aquinas pays a lot of attention to it. Aristotle gives us the first really analytical treatment of it, though one finds it, of course, in Plato. Namely, the fact, or in any event, what we believe, those of us in the tradition believe to be the fact, that by our choices and actions, we not only alter states of affairs in the world external to us, though our actions certainly do that, but also and at the same time determine and constitute ourselves, for better or worse, as persons with a certain character. We are what we do. That's how character is shaped. That's why you worry and you do stuff. You take action when you come home from the grocery store and your 4-year-old daughter has a package of sweet tarts that you didn't buy. Now, are you worried that the store's going to miss the sweet tarts? Are you worried they're going to be arrested? Are you worried the store's going to go broke because she took the sweet tarts? No. But why do you hop back in the car and drive back to the store and go to the store clerk and say, Sally has something she'd like to return to you. Right, Sally? It's because you're worried about the intransitive consequences of action. You're worried about the shaping, the self-shaping quality of choosing. You want her to learn to repent of an immoral choice, a bad choice, stealing shoplifting the sweet tarts, okay? And that's on the assumption, which Hume's going to deny, but which, like every sensible human being, your grandmother knew was absolutely true, that you're shaped by your choices. Your choices aren't just these passing things. They last in the character and personality until they're, for better or worse, repented of, and a different course is chosen that dynamically orient you in one direction or another. Recognition of this self-shaping or intransitive quality of morally significant choosing leads to a focus on virtues as habits born of upright choosing that orient and dispose us to further upright choosing, especially in the face of powerful temptations to behave immorally. Temptations that, when we yield to them, will then instrumentalize and harness our own reason to cook up rationalizations for why it wasn't really wrong to do it. People sometimes ask, is natural law about rules or virtues? Like they think it's got to be this one thing or the other. It's got to be about rules or virtues. And the answer from the point of view of at least natural law theorists of my ilk is that it's about both. And they're connected. A complete theory of natural law identifies norms for distinguishing right from wrong, as well as habits or traits of character, virtues, whose cultivation disposes people to choose in conformity with the norms and thus compatibly with what we might call, borrowing a phrase from our friend Kant, a goodwill. Remember, Kant says that the only thing that really can unconditionally be called good is goodwill. I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, he's got the idea that virtue, goodness, moral goodness, is about rectitude in choosing. But I would add to that we should understand a goodwill rightly, which is that is a will positively disposed toward the integral fulfillment of human beings. Thank you, Kelly, for letting me go on a little longer.